Daniel never planned to become lost. The flight was supposed to be short and simple. The sky was clear when he started, and the ocean below looked calm and endless. But storms can appear without warning. Dark clouds surrounded the small aircraft, and strong wind pushed it off course. The controls stopped responding. The engine made a loud, painful sound. Daniel tried to stay calm, but fear slowly filled his chest. The last thing he remembered was lightning flashing across the sky before everything went black. When Daniel opened his eyes, he felt sand under his hands. The air was warm, and the sound of waves filled his ears. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. He slowly sat up and saw broken pieces of his aircraft scattered along the beach. The crash had destroyed everything. He was alone. He stood up carefully. His body hurt, but he was alive. The island looked beautiful and peaceful. Tall trees moved gently in the wind, and birds flew above him. It looked like a normal deserted island. Daniel felt relief. At least he had survived. Then he noticed the footprints. They were pressed deep into the sand, much larger than any human footprint. Each one was longer than his entire body. Daniel stared at them, confused. He tried to convince himself they belonged to some unknown animal, but the shape was clearly human. A strange feeling grew inside him. The ground suddenly shook. At first, Daniel thought it was another crash or an earthquake, but the shaking came in slow, heavy steps. Boom, boom, boom. Each step made the sand move under his feet. A large shadow covered him, blocking the sunlight. Daniel slowly looked up. His breath stopped. A giant woman stood before him, taller than the trees around her. Her long hair moved in the wind, and her eyes watched him with surprise. She did not look angry. She looked curious, like she had discovered something impossible. Daniel tried to run, but his legs failed him. He fell to the sand, too weak to move. The giantess carefully lowered her hand toward him. Her fingers were bigger than his whole body. He closed his eyes, expecting pain, but her touch was gentle. She lifted him slowly, holding him close to her face. Her eyes studied him carefully, as if she was trying to understand what he was. Daniel realized she had never seen a human before. The giantess spoke in a soft voice. Daniel could not understand the words, but her tone sounded calm. She smiled slightly, and the fear inside him changed into confusion. Why was she not hurting him? Soon, Daniel noticed movement behind her. More giant women appeared between the trees. Some looked shocked. Others whispered to each other. They stared at Daniel like he was something rare. The island was not empty. It was full of giantesses. Daniel's heart raced. He felt smaller than ever before. He realized there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. If they wanted to harm him, he could do nothing. One giantess stepped forward. She looked stronger and more confident than the others. Her eyes were sharp, and her voice was firm when she spoke. The others seemed to listen to her. She was clearly the leader. Her name was Lyra. Lyra looked directly at Daniel, thinking carefully. The other giantesses argued around her, some pointing at him, others shaking their heads. Daniel could not understand their language, but he could feel the tension. After a long moment, Lyra raised her hand, and the others became silent. She made a decision. Lyra gently took Daniel from the first giantess and held him in her palm. Her expression softened slightly. She spoke again, slower this time, as if trying to comfort him. Daniel did not understand the words, but he understood one thing. He was not free. As the sun began to set, Lyra carried him deeper into the island. The trees grew taller, and strange stone structures appeared between them. This was their home. Daniel looked back at the ocean, realizing how far away his old life already felt. He had survived the crash, but now he faced something far more frightening. Why did these giantesses believe his arrival was important? And why did Lyra look at him like he was meant to be there all along? Daniel did not sleep much that night. Everything around him felt too strange to be real. Lyra placed him inside a small shelter made from smooth stone and soft leaves. To her, it was probably nothing more than a simple resting place. To Daniel, it felt like a giant room built for creatures far beyond human size. He sat near the entrance and watched the island under the moonlight. Fires burned in the distance where the giantesses gathered. Their voices echoed softly through the trees. The sound was deep but calm, almost peaceful. Still, Daniel could not relax. He did not know if he was a guest or a prisoner. The next morning, Lyra returned. She carried a large fruit and carefully broke a small piece for him. Daniel hesitated at first, but hunger won. The fruit tasted sweet and fresh. Lyra watched closely, as if studying every movement he made. She seemed curious about everything: how he ate, how he walked, how he reacted to simple things. Slowly, Daniel began to understand something important. The giantesses were not monsters. They were careful and gentle, especially around him. But they were also cautious. Many of them stayed at a distance, whispering to each other while watching him. As days passed, Daniel learned more about their world without needing words. The giantesses lived in groups, helping each other gather food and build shelters. They were strong enough to lift massive stones, yet they avoided fighting. Their island was hidden, far from human ships and cities. One afternoon, Daniel followed Lyra to a high cliff. From there, he could see the entire island. It was huge, surrounded by sharp rocks that made it difficult for boats to approach. Lyra pointed toward the ocean and shook her head slowly, as if warning him. Daniel understood. Leaving the island would not be easy. But something else caught his attention. Many areas of the island looked empty, as if people once lived there but were gone now. Broken structures stood between the trees, covered in vines. The giantesses seemed to avoid those places. That night, Daniel noticed sadness in their voices. Some giantesses looked tired and weak. Others argued quietly with the elders. Even without understanding their language, Daniel could feel that something was wrong. Later, Lyra sat near him, unusually silent. After a long moment, she tried to explain using simple gestures. She pointed at the island, then at the giantesses, and slowly lowered her hand toward the ground. Then she shook her head. Daniel understood the meaning. Their numbers were falling. The giantesses were disappearing. Food was becoming harder to find, and fewer children were being born. The island that once felt alive was slowly growing empty. For the first time, Daniel realized why they looked at him with such interest. He was something new, something unexpected, something different. The next day, a group of older giantesses gathered around him. Their expressions were serious. They spoke to Lyra in strong voices, clearly disagreeing about something. One of them pointed directly at Daniel, her face filled with concern. Lyra stepped in front of him protectively. The argument ended, but the tension remained. That night, Daniel woke up to raised voices outside. He moved closer to the entrance and listened. The elders were speaking urgently. He could not understand the words, but he heard his name repeated again and again. He realized they were talking about him, not as a guest, but as part of a decision. Daniel's heart began to race. He never asked to be part of their world. He only wanted to survive and find a way home. But now it felt like his arrival had changed something important. As he looked out at the giant figures standing under the moonlight, one thought refused to leave his mind. What if his crash was not just an accident? And why did the elders sound afraid of what he might become for them? Days passed, but the feeling of tension never disappeared. Daniel could feel it in the way the giantesses watched him. Some smiled kindly when Lyra was near, but others looked at him with worry, even fear. He began to understand that his presence was changing things on the island, and not everyone liked that. Lyra continued to protect him. She showed him safe paths through the forest and brought him food every day. Even without sharing the same language, Daniel started to understand her expressions. When she smiled, he felt safe. When she looked serious, he knew something was wrong. One afternoon, Daniel followed a group of giantesses from a distance. They were carrying large baskets filled with fruits and roots, but their movements looked slow and tired. One of them stumbled while walking. Another helped her stand. Daniel noticed how thin some of them looked compared to Lyra. The island was struggling more than he first thought. Later that evening, Lyra took him to a high stone circle where the elders gathered. She placed him gently on a flat rock and spoke to the others. Their voices grew louder as they argued. Daniel could not understand the words, but the meaning slowly became clear through their gestures. Some of them wanted to study him. Others wanted him gone. An older giantess stepped forward, her face serious. She pointed toward the ocean, then toward Daniel, and finally toward the island. Her expression was full of warning. She believed humans would eventually come looking for him, and when they did, they might discover the island and destroy everything. Daniel felt a heavy weight in his chest. He never wanted to bring danger to them. He was just trying to survive. That night, Lyra finally revealed part of the truth in the only way she could. She drew shapes in the sand. First, she drew a giant figure, then many smaller ones beside it. Slowly, she erased the smaller figures until only one remained. After that, she drew a small human figure next to the last giant. Daniel stared at the drawing. The giantesses were dying out, and somehow, they believed humans had something they lost long ago, the ability to adapt, to change, to survive when the world became difficult. His arrival gave them hope, but it also created fear. The next morning, the conflict became worse. Another powerful giantess named Vara challenged Lyra openly. Vara was taller and stronger, with a cold and serious expression. She believed keeping Daniel was a mistake. She argued that humans only brought war and destruction. Many giantesses agreed with her. The argument grew intense. Daniel watched from a distance, feeling helpless. He hated being the reason for their division. Then nature made the decision for them. A violent storm hit the island that night. Strong winds tore through the trees, and heavy rain flooded parts of the village. One of the stone shelters collapsed, trapping several giantesses under broken rocks. Panic spread quickly. Without thinking, Daniel acted. He remembered survival techniques from his old life. He pointed toward higher ground and showed them how to move water away using fallen logs and stone paths. His ideas were small compared to their strength, but they worked. The flooding slowed, and the trapped giantesses were rescued safely. For the first time, the giantesses looked at him differently, not as something weak, but as someone useful. Even Vara watched him in silence, her expression uncertain. When the storm finally ended, the elders gathered again. This time, their voices were calm but serious. Lyra looked down at Daniel, and for the first time since he arrived, she looked afraid. Daniel realized something important was about to happen. The elders had made their decision, and whatever they decided would change his future and the future of the giantesses forever. The morning after the storm felt different. The air was calm, but the island no longer felt peaceful. Daniel noticed how the giantesses moved quietly, watching him more than before. Word of what he had done during the storm had spread quickly. Some now looked at him with respect. Others looked even more worried. The elders called everyone to the stone circle again. Daniel stood beside Lyra as the giantesses gathered around them. Their voices were serious, and this time there was no arguing. The decision had already been made. Lyra knelt down and tried to explain using gestures and simple drawings in the sand. She drew the island first, then Daniel beside it. After that, she drew a line across the ocean and shook her head. Daniel understood. They wanted him to stay. Not for a few days. Not until he recovered. Forever. The elders believed Daniel's knowledge and different way of thinking could help their race survive. He had already shown them new ideas during the storm. They believed humans adapted faster than giantesses, and they hoped he could teach them how to change before it was too late. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Part of him understood their fear. The island was slowly dying, and they were desperate for hope. But staying meant giving up everything he once knew, his home, his past, and any chance of seeing human civilization again. That night, Daniel sat alone near the beach. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of him. Somewhere beyond that horizon was his old life. Family, friends, and a world where he belonged. Or at least, where he used to belong. Lyra approached quietly and sat beside him. For once, she did not try to guide or protect him. She simply watched the ocean with him. After a long silence, she placed her hand gently on the sand near him, leaving space for him to choose his own path. For the first time, Daniel realized something important. Lyra was no longer forcing him to stay. She was afraid he might leave. The next morning, everything changed again. Daniel noticed movement far beyond the cliffs. Dark shapes moved across the water. Ships. Human ships. His heart jumped. Rescue had finally come. But the giantesses reacted with fear. Some ran toward the forest. Others prepared to hide the village. The elders spoke urgently, their voices filled with panic. Humans were the one thing they feared most. Long ago, humans had tried to hunt them, capture them, and study them. If the ships came closer, the island would be discovered. Daniel stood frozen between two worlds. The ships meant safety and a return home, but they also meant danger for the giantesses who had saved his life. Vara approached him, her voice firm. Even without understanding her words, Daniel understood her meaning. If humans found the island because of him, everything would end. Lyra said nothing. She only watched him, waiting. The choice was now his. Run toward the cliffs and signal the ships, or help the giantesses remain hidden forever. Daniel looked at the ocean, then back at the island. He remembered the storm, the fear in their eyes, and the way they trusted him when everything was falling apart. Slowly, he made his decision. Instead of moving toward the cliffs, Daniel turned back toward the village. The giantesses watched in silence as he began explaining a plan using gestures and drawings in the sand, a way to hide signs of life and make the island look empty from the sea. Lyra's eyes widened in surprise. Daniel had chosen a side, but deep inside, he knew this decision would change his life forever. Because once the ships left, there might be no way back. And as the human ships moved closer to the island, Daniel wondered if he had just saved the giantesses or trapped himself on the island forever. The ships stayed near the island for hours. From the cliffs, Daniel could see them clearly, small compared to the giantesses, but powerful enough to change everything. Smoke rose from their engines as they slowly moved along the coastline, searching. Maybe they were looking for survivors from the crash. Maybe they had detected the aircraft signal. Either way, danger was close. The giantesses waited silently in the forest. Fires were extinguished. Large structures were covered with leaves and branches. Even their footsteps became careful and slow. The island, once full of life, suddenly looked empty. Daniel worked with Lyra and the elders, using simple drawings in the sand. He showed them how humans search from far away, looking for movement, smoke, or unusual shapes. Together, they moved large stones to block clear paths and covered open areas with natural materials. The giantesses followed his ideas carefully. For the first time, they were not just protecting him. They were trusting him. Hours passed slowly. The sound of the ships echoed across the water. Daniel's heart beat faster each time one came closer to the shore. A part of him wanted to run to the beach and wave for help, to return home, to return to a life that felt safe and familiar. But when he looked at the giantesses hiding around him, he saw fear in their eyes. Not fear of him, fear of losing everything. As the sun began to set, the ships finally turned away. One by one, they disappeared beyond the horizon. The danger was gone. A deep silence filled the island. Then, slowly, relief spread through the giantesses. Some laughed softly. Others sat down exhausted. The elders looked toward Daniel with new respect. He was no longer just a strange visitor. He had protected their home. That night, a large fire was lit in the center of the village. For the first time since Daniel arrived, the atmosphere felt warm and hopeful. The giantesses gathered together, sharing food and stories. Even Vara, who once opposed him, gave a small nod of acceptance. Later, Lyra approached Daniel near the edge of the village. She knelt down, so her eyes were level with him. Her expression was calm but emotional. She placed her hand gently on the ground and then pointed toward the ocean, giving him a choice again. He could still leave someday if another chance came. This time, nothing was forced. Daniel looked at the dark ocean, thinking about the life he had lost. The crash had taken everything from him. But this island had given him something new, a place where he mattered, where his ideas helped others survive. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel lost. He shook his head slowly. Lyra smiled, understanding his answer. Seasons passed after that. Daniel helped the giantesses improve their shelters, find new food sources, and protect their island better. In return, they taught him their ways, patience, strength, and balance with nature. The island slowly became alive again. The giantesses no longer saw humans only as enemies, because one human had chosen to protect them instead of himself. One evening, Daniel stood on the cliff where he first saw the island. The ocean stretched endlessly before him, calm and quiet. His arrival had been an accident, a mistake caused by a storm. But sometimes, accidents changed everything. Behind him, the giantesses laughed and called his name. He turned back toward them, no longer feeling like an outsider. He had fallen onto the island by chance, but he stayed because it became his home. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel knew that his story, the story of the human who helped save the last giantesses, was only the beginning of something much bigger. And a Part 5, story complete.